Welcome to today's webinar, episode 7 of our series on After the Crossroads, AI and Our Future. And this episode will be featuring a discussion of governing with AI in a democratic society. Leadership today is being reshaped, not just by politics or personality, but by machines. The most revered leaders of the 20th century, public and private, inspired through vision and delegated through trust. In my own career, whether in public or private sector, a clear vision and delegating were core to success. Artificial intelligence is already granting leaders access to every detail, every data point, every deviation. The temptation to micromanage becomes almost irresistible. But this shift threatens to undermine the very foundation of great leadership, trust, vision, and the empowerment of others. In the age of AI, will leadership become a euphemism for surveillance and control? Did Orwell just get the date wrong? Today we'll be exploring the paradox at the heart of our times. AI can strengthen democratic participation, fuel economic development, and improve public services. But it can just as easily distort elections, accelerate inequality, and erode freedoms if left unchecked. The task before democratic government is not only to innovate, but to regulate wisely with foresight, courage, and restraint. The question is stark. Will AI serve democracy, or will democracy be forced to serve AI? So let's begin. Our panel today is comprised of Alain Dudoit, Emerson Csorba, Peter MacKinnon, and Eli Fathi. I'll give you a little bit of color on each of those, as some of you have asked to give more background on them, so you know exactly who they are. Alain is a former Canadian diplomat who served as ambassador to the Czech and Slovak republics, Spain, and Andorra, as well as serving as consul general in Los Angeles for Canada. Since retiring, Alain has held leadership roles at McGill University. He co-founded CEO Networks, QG100 and OG100, and he advised the Milken Institute. He's also helped establish Scale AI, Canada's AI and supply chain supercluster. As for Emerson, he's vice president at Audacity Investment. He focuses on deepening technology and financial services, and he's previously led renewable energy projects in the UK as deputy CEO of Ridge Clean Energy and worked on democracy and global relations at Ditchley's Foundation. He's a Clarendon Scholar with a PhD from Oxford. He's also a published author and frequent media contributor, and he was a core on our panelists for our series on Youth at the Crossroads, the predecessor to this series. As for Peter MacKinnon, he's a management consultant and an academic with global experience in science, technology, innovation, and digital transformation. He will, by the way, be opening this discussion today. As I'm finished introducing each of the panelists, I've asked Peter if he'll warm us up to the topic with a few slides. He's advised governments and businesses worldwide. He represented Canada at the OECD and pioneered initiatives in AI commercialization, smart cities, and telehealth. Currently, Peter directs the Global Research Institute on Integrity for Technology, very topical, and remains active in international advisory and policy work. And last but not least, Eli. He's a visionary technology leader, founder of multiple successful companies that introduce products to AI as global markets. Over 4 decades, Eli has mentored and coached entrepreneurs while publishing extensively on business and AI's impact on society. He was appointed to the Order of Canada in 2022 and named a Fellow of the Canadian Academy of Engineering in 2025. So, as I mentioned in the course of those introductory comments, Peter, I'd like you to warm us up to the topic today, and I know you've got a few slides to share, so your turn.
So as Perry mentioned, we're going to talk about governing with AI in a democratic society. I'm also going to compare this a little bit with some autocratic societies, so we have a comparison of the differences. So here's what I'd like to talk about. I'll set the stage as to where we're at, then how AI could, by example, help democratic governments improve their operations and services. I'll give some examples of disruptors in governance, and this is one of the reasons we're concerned about this issue of regulation of AI. Also, I'll outline the need for what we'll call responsible AI governance, in fact, a framework for that. And that does relate to some degree to work that's also being carried out by international organizations such as the OECD. I'll also talk about why there's a need for guardrails, regulation, and certification. And when I speak of certification, I'm referring to the people who build these systems or the people who run these systems in mission critical environments. And then I'll do a comparative view between the role of AI and governance within a democracy versus an autocracy, and then look at future prospects of AI governance. So that's my introduction. The stage, as color coded, I'll basically highlight the darker or the blue colors. Others is further information, and I won't say everything that's on these slides. But I start with, and I have an optimistic view, as I'm sure the panelists do as well, that AI has the promise of huge economic opportunity and benefit to humanity kind of opportunity. But it also, because of its nature, and we'll call that dual use. In other words, it can be used for good or for nefarious purposes. And I use that word specifically. So I use an example as a match. A match can be used to light a fire to roast a meal on an open log fire, or you can use it to burn a house down. So it's dual use too. It's a matter of the person's integrity and the ethics in which they have come to operate in. So that said, data is now the new global currency, and data has become the key ingredient beyond electricity to allow these large language models that are the current rage in artificial intelligence to gain the traction that they have today, and both good and bad uses. And we're seeing increasing bad uses, unfortunately. So the points I want to make here in summary, though, is this is where the negative side of AI is it's disruptive in both technical and societal contexts. It's dual use, as I just mentioned. And more importantly, right now, it's in the wild. It's out and it's uncontained, uncontrolled, unconstrained. And so anybody can do whatever they wish to do with these tools. And there's a lot of limitations that are not been built in. So we'll look into some of that as we drill into our conversation tonight. It's also driving geopolitics in the context of nation states, competing with each other on a variety of reasons. Organizational change in a broad sense. We're going to see a massive transformation, I anticipate, not unlike the industrial age that arose with the invention of the steam engine. And it's going to transform work in many ways, as well as, of course, continue to feed social silos or the social world. And as a technical, in a technology sense, this is a first time we really have a technology that can manipulate the human mind at the level of the individual, unlike any other. We've had mass media that basically tell us the story of a news or an opinion, but it's quite different than this being ability to be manipulated on your own, individually, privately, and so on by a chatbot. So that's setting the stage. How can AI help democracies improve operations and services? This is just to give a quick outline, and I won't go into any detail here, but clearly improving productivity has been a big issue in government as well as here in Canada in general, in our private sector as well. But productivity, responsiveness in terms of the timeliness of getting effective answers to who's ever making an inquiry, and accountability so that things are traceable. So those are key things that are about how AI could help improve operations and services of government. It also can be used as in a safe, secure, and trustworthy way, will help build public interest as well as trust. And critical areas of concern, so now we get into the issues of how it could be a problem, is how these chatbots handle things like human and civil rights, protecting personal privacy, and clearly the issue of securing algorithmic transparency, or at least algorithmic certification, that these algorithms do what they're claimed to do, as opposed to they do things that they're not advertised to do. And a variety of other things, accountability and so on. So governments are increasing their efforts to develop and procure trustworthy AI in line with principles being developed by organizations such as the OECD. And we'll probably hear more about that as we get into our conversation. Now, there's a variety of disruptors, and these are just some examples. And this is from the lens of looking at disrupting governance. And there's a wide range of things here. Some of them has already been mentioned by Perry. I need not read these. You can see them yourselves and are well aware of some of these, if not all. But meanwhile, so there's a dichotomy a bit here. Governments are concerned about the disruption, but at the same time, they're pouring billions of investment units, whether it's dollars or yuan or pounds or euros, etc., into national AI competition. And this is leading to basically two camps, a Western camp and an Eastern camp, if I could put it in those terms, where Western is Europe and North America type alliances, and Eastern would be primarily around the concepts that China has been promoting. Again, we can talk more about that details with questions. So there's a need, of course, that you've all heard about the need for guardrails. More so now as regulations and certifications, which I just mentioned about. The certifications is about the people, regulations is about the use of the tools, and guardrails are how they perform under normal conditions and should not go off guard, like a railway. An engine on a track shouldn't be going off the tracks, or otherwise it'll be a wreck. So guardrails are really important in AI, and we can talk more about that. And finally, on this, or not finally, but another point here is governments are taking notice, but there's no consensus whatsoever. You'll hear various quotes, and I've heard, of course, already that the European Union has passed an AI Act. Some of it has come into effect already, but the main act doesn't come into effect formally, full act, until August of next year. So it's the only international or even national like. It's, of course, dealing with the EU, so number of countries, I think 34. So they will follow those rules. Whereas recently, the Trump administration has issued executive orders that are disbanding any kinds of rules that the US had previously established. So the US is moving on to a no holds barred approach, Wild West in the classic sense of America. The cops will have to come in at some point, but probably it'd be more like the paladins who come with guns for hire. But nonetheless, it's two different models are developing right now, even in the Western world, one with no rules and one with considerable effort to focus on rules. And finally, just a few more points on guardrails regulations. There's a gentleman named Nick Bodstrom. Some of you may have heard of. He's an existential philosopher at the University of Oxford, and he's been involved in looking at existential threats to humanity for quite some years in his work. And he is quoted here: "Machine intelligence is the last invention that humanity will ever need to make." Well, I would suggest that maybe he's correct if at least we can't get a handle on developing rules and regulations around AI. Because if it's out of the box, as if everyone had a nuclear weapon, then we're going to be in very deep doo-doo. So I think his point is well taken, but it's quite extreme. And there's no silver bullet in any of this stuff. So, we don't know what's going to stop AI if it gets to a in fact, more general point of reaching the level of human performance. Some might say it's getting that way now. So there's a need for responsible AI governance framework, and I'll just point out some of the key points here. I would say the core principles are on this page: transparency, explainability, accountability, fairness and non-discrimination, privacy and security, and human oversight. And these are in steep contrast to what you might imagine a autocratic government might have in mind. Furthermore, there's other components. It says institutional structures, standards and guardrails, as well as stakeholder involvement in the stakeholders could be first and public sector as well as third party. So there's a variety of components to an AI governance framework. Some of them are technical, some of them are administrative, some of them are organizational, as you can see. So in summary, responsible AI governance is a mix of ethical principles, legal frameworks, and technical standards, organizational processes, and democratic oversight. Now, this is an issue that I don't have a solution to here either, but who decides the rules in a landscape dominated by both state and corporate actors? And we see that in all dimensions, all areas of the world that are involved in AI. Even in China, there's state actors. such as China Telecom, which is a state-owned enterprise, and private corporations such as Alibaba, which you no doubt have heard of. And these are all working collectively in collaborations with their national governments, while at the same time being regulated to some extent in the case of the EU coming, and in China to some degree already, because China's large language models are actually approved by the government before they're released to the public. And in fact, about 2 years ago, China did something rather unusual. I've been a follower of Chinese science and technology for many years. And about 2 years ago, the Chinese government actually asked the public for comments on rules they were proposing for large language models. And that's the first time in more than 20 years I've been following S&T in China that I've ever seen the request to the public anywhere in the world to give them comment about these rules. I think China's looking to try and perhaps become a major center of AI safety, so to speak, especially when we see the United States running away from that. So about my second last slide, I think. So comparative views here on AI in terms of democracy and autocracy. Well, you can see the aspects I've chosen to emphasize: transparency, citizen role, risk of abuse, and policy use. And then as I was just proofreading this a little while before this meeting, this particular slide went out of whack. So legitimacy is actually those three sections there, but I couldn't get it to line up again. So the point is, these are the comparisons between autocratic and democratic governments in a very high level sense, and this may feed some of our conversation. And future prospects. Well, in democracies, I would suggest that a key challenge is balancing innovation with regulation, fairness, and trust. And this idea that slowing down innovation is an issue, to me, isn't. I mean, maybe we need to slow down innovation in order to, in fact, ensure we have regulation, fairness, and trust, because this is such transformative stuff. So I don't have any issue about slowing down innovation. There's no need to rush to the end point when we don't even know what that end point is. And then, of course, in the case of a democracy, AI can reinforce authoritarian control. We all are well aware of that. But at the same time, it also leads to from a governance point of view, brittle governance, as in it's very rigid, and it could easily lead to popular resistance in the longer term. And it took 70 years for the Soviet Union to disappear, but it ultimately eventually disappeared. So this could well happen with autocratic governments if AI is pushing back on the citizenry. And these are some affiliations that I have, and these are the questions that Perry is going to pose. So that's all I have to say at this point. Over to you, Perry.
What's fascinating, Peter, as I listen to this, is to reflect on why the KEI network exists. And with the rapid rate at which technologies are entering into society, and specifically in today's discussion, AI, I've always wondered, and we've often discussed, what the form of governance may well take. Today, when we think of governments, we think of nations, we think of national governance. But we saw the League of Nations formed with Woodrow Wilson. We saw the United Nations with Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt saying, let's never have a war. Maybe it's time to think beyond individual nations and some of the collectives that we have on what the nature of governance may well look like in the future with AI. It's an interesting question, and I don't know what form that might take, whether or not AI may in fact be its own governor. But I'll leave that for reflection as we go through the day. So my first question, and I'll pose this to you, Alain, and by the way, thank you, Peter, very much. That was a terrific warm-up. In authoritarian regimes, AI is already embraced. In fact, some might say it's weaponized for purposes of surveillance and obedience, and we reflect on the social credit system in China, but there's plenty going on in the West as well. Democracies use many of these same tools for security and efficiency. How can democratic governments, or even can democratic governments, use AI without drifting into authoritarian excess? I don't know if the answer is yes or no. I think the answer here is probably more of a discussion. So, Alain, when you think about AI and authoritarian excesses, what troubles you, or what confidence, or what hope can you share with us?
I would say, can democratic governments deploy AI without drifting toward authority? I believe so. Yes, that's what democratic governments are for. And by the way, if I was to use a few keywords there to summarize my thought, first of all, it's not AI that is going to decide on the future of our democracy. It will be us who will be deciding this. It's not AI. AI is a tool, a wonderful tool or a dangerous tool, but it is only a tool so far. And it's our destiny that is in. Our destiny is very much threatened at present as democracy and as human beings. If we look at the not so distant future, and when I say future, I'm thinking of the next 3 years. In the next 3 years, there will be much more data generated in the next 3 years than there have ever been in the preceding history of humankind. So that tells you, some people are talking of data tsunami or AI tsunami. Well, it is a true tsunami. It is a true tempest. So how are we going to manage? That question belongs to us. It doesn't belong to AI. It doesn't belong to the developer. It belongs to democratic governments. Now, the challenge that we are facing now, and by the way, we are in a state of crisis, a crisis that is even more dangerous, that has been never more dangerous since the Second World War. AI is being weaponized, not only, by the way, by authoritarian governments, and yes, we have in mind China, and this is the case that China is building its control over its population on AI, and it's also building its fight for world dominance in technology. It's building it on AI, but we have also our close neighbor and unreliable partner, the US, who is treating AI now as a national security issue. There is a weaponization of AI in that fight for global dominance between the two juggernauts. And if I add to other authoritarian countries, we have to think of Russia. Also, Russia has a very strong capacity in AI, but it's certainly not at the same level of global hegemony than the US or I should say the US I don't know if we have to say US or China are. So that's the current challenge that we are facing, we as a country, Canada. How are we going to promote our democracy in the face of that tsunami and in the face of a global war for AI dominance? And frankly, I don't have the simple answer to offer you right now.
Well, usage of the word war brings forth a whole series of regulatory regimes that we've tried to use in governing war. We'll have to see whether they apply to AI. Emerson, I'm going to call on you next. Is there anything you'd like to add or a different perspective?
So first off, thank you for the good presentation, Peter, and the good points, Alain, which I'm going to partly build on. The pieces I would add on drifting towards authoritarian excess, I think my answer would be it's going to happen not just because of how the Americans are right now, but because citizens are also becoming more controlling in their values. And part of this is just if you look at how people use technology now, they hide behind it and use it to control the tempo, the rhythm of their relationships. So people on the whole are becoming much more controlling, much more authoritarian in their basic approach to relationships. And I think people will focus on politics, but forget the fact that citizens, that the normal person is becoming much more controlling, authoritarian in their approach because of technology. So that's my first thought. The piece that I think, in terms of regulation, I don't think we're going to see a lot of progress on that front because we are moving towards a world that is increasingly focused on competition and war. And when that's taking place, people are going to care less and less about regulation because they're going to focus on doing whatever is needed to win. So I'm more in the camp of the Americans in terms of removing regulation or just not paying as much attention to it because that's just not vital to survival against China if we look 30 to 50 years down the road. So that would be my second point. And my third piece is when it comes to interrogating AI, I don't think this is really in the realm of government to solve. I think this is more in the realm of how do we create more social cohesion at the level of local communities across Canada, the UK, elsewhere, so people are spending meaningful time together across difference and learning that we're actually more similar than we think we are. And I think here to the work of Robert Putnam, Bowling Alone, Our Kids, how do we develop new forms of local community where people like church, like what's a new version of a church? You know, those kinds of things where people become less polarized and we can help solve that problem on using AI as a way to monitor people and start to focus more on external economic uses of AI because of the wider geopolitical challenge. So I'm less on government regulation, more focused on how do we get people connected at local levels. And I think that's partly the role of business, pension funds, government to an extent to do that. And that will help people, that will help insulate people from the harms of bias through AI.
Perry, may I add to that? When you look at AI, we keep on focusing on AI. And when we look at two levels, the corporate world and the geopolitical, and from my perspective, it's really at this point in time a two-horse race, the US and China. And everybody else is going to be a secondary player. I mean, they already identify, if you read all the VCs and the investment, the next layer, the big LLMs that are going to be available, the next layer is the small applications with specific data that is dealing with some topic of interest, of know-how that is unique to a particular group. But when you look at AI in general, and ignore for a second the geopolitical, what the arms race that you look at between the two superpower, really it's economic value at the end of the day, because that race, it has an element of, yes, security to it for sure, because if you have the AI, you have the more secure capabilities from a basically military perspective. However, it's the economic card that AI will bring. And if we look at the economic card, it's the indirect outcomes of the AI. But there is another element that we are forgetting. Citizen, we really look at two elements, and there are trends that are taking place without us. And I think that, Emerson, you mentioned the fact that if you look at the social media, if you talked about the individual and how individual behave, the social media by itself, the trend that is happening with the social media is significant. And what it becomes to the level that individual, one activist can really move a whole community based on activism associated with a particular interest. So the economic and security are what going to determine for individual what they'll decide if they will be willing to accept. And if we go back in history, and I think, Perry, you mentioned indirectly, people will be willing to trade security, extra security to have for freedoms, because they will want to have the jobs, they want to have economic benefit, and they want to have security. And when you have situation that will come about in certain countries where you have to choose between these two, personal freedom or give up a little bit of personal freedom in order to secure economic benefit and safety, you may see that some individual, not across the board, some individual will choose to do that. And that final point that I want to raise on that, we are seeing a lot of small companies that are developing things that talking about dual use. There is a company in the US I just read about last week that blew my mind. They have 80,000 cameras, 80,000 cameras across the US in public spaces. And the policemen, the police groups and other cities are utilizing them to solve problems. So there is an example where it is actually very valuable. However, you can say at the same time it infringes on a personal freedom because these cameras are seeing everything that you do. So it's a very complex situation that it drops from the government level to corporate level that are doing things that individually it appears non-nefarious and absolutely on a good intent, but again, at a certain level, could turn into different use. So that's definitely is a concern that we have to address.
So with an application that literally is global, this is not contained by a single nation. And with the multiple players, government, corporations, and individuals themselves able to use and play with this toy, the regulatory process is very complex, and the rate of change just adds to that complexity. Peter, you get the final word on this question. Anything further you want to add?
No, I was, in the interest of time, I will let this pass in terms of giving a comment. I support what I heard. Emerson is a little more open on the with no regulation side of things in the U.S. than I am at this point, but that's a matter of degree.
Okay. Well, Peter, I'm going to start out with you then on the next question. AI-driven micro-targeting, deep fakes and algorithms, news feeds are reshaping campaigns and elections and our political choices. What safeguards or innovations are needed, if any at all, to ensure elections remain authentic, transparent, and rooted in informed citizen choice rather than emotional manipulation, foundational to a democracy? Eli, we're talking here about elections and emotional manipulation or getting the facts from the people.
So my solution is really dealing with a number of way of combating it. To me, number one is innovation, and if we have to, legal. And the reason I'm concerned about the legal, because again, it's a double-edged sword where legal can be utilized against both ways. But if we look from an innovation perspective, just today, literally an hour ago, I read this morning that Google Pixel 10 is going to follow the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And basically, it's provide content credential label for text, video, and imaging. Now, there is an example where, and TikTok did something similar a year ago. So there is an example where innovation is going to at least provide certain level of certainty. Now, people will say, but Google, what are you doing? You, in essence, telling me, okay, that what I'm doing, you are basically reviewing everything that I'm doing. So you're really getting into my personal stuff and you're labeling it. But from the general public, it's a great idea. So I think innovation is one area that must be and maybe legislated, which some of it already, because a lot of the people are supporting, Microsoft, Adobe, all supporting this particular agreement and coalition. So innovation number one is in the technology. The second innovation, well, so related to individual PC, your cell phone, and the creation, when you're doing the creation of information. The second one has to do with voting system. And I think that there be no reason, and again, I know of a small startup, I believe it's Sam Altman, but maybe not, who is looking at iris scanning and trying to get, over time, think about it, that everybody will be identified biometrics, if it is an iris or it's something else. And that means that you'll be in a position to ensure that when it's the vote is Perry or the vote is that of Peter and not somebody else. So that's innovation is going to take place, and I think that it's very important that we do that. And finally, it's really the legal side. At a certain point in time, it really aches me to say that because it's very controversial, because any legislation that you are going to tell media to remove information, it's scary because where is the free speech? So that is a slippery slope. I don't know how to handle it. I know that in present and in the past, Meta and other used to have people that review the information. The bots, I mean, we can remove bots. On TikTok, there is a lot of bots from Russia, from China. So can you remove some of it by legislation, especially the bots? But that, to me, could be very slippery slope in the sense that if you remove some, who is determining what is correct and what's not correct? So, but we have to rely on technology and innovation, and to some degree more limited on the legal side to ensure that we are combating the fake news, the misinformation and disinformation.
Okay, Emerson.
Great. These are all very interesting points on the legal piece and the innovation piece. I'm not an expert in deepfakes and on regulation or on different legal approaches that can be taken. So I won't take that angle on this. I think what I'll come back to is I'll build on what I said earlier and a little bit on what Eli was saying earlier, which is that when it comes to the emotional manipulation side of things, when people are less economically secure, they're more prone to being swayed by these kinds of things and by authoritarian values. So I think there's a big piece in here which is outside of AI, or it's connected to AI to the extent that it improves economic growth, which is that we need to do everything we can to make people more economically secure, which might involve some creative destruction in the short term. But the more economically secure people can be, the more critical they are going to be of the kind of things that they're receiving. And also the more open-minded they're going to be to difference. There's a good book by a Harvard prof, Benjamin Friedman, that basically says that when there's economic growth, people become much more tolerant. And when there's slowed growth, people become much less tolerant to difference because the pie is smaller and people are competing for small pieces of the pie. So I think there's a huge piece here on economic growth. And the second piece I'd come back to again is on how do we better educate people, not in the sense of formal education, because more formal education, I think, makes people less tolerant. To me, the question is, how do we educate people through local forms of informal community? One example would be in Britain after World War II, there was the Workers' Educational Association that brought together union workers, miners, others who banded together and taught each other philosophy, economics, all these types of topics. And it was a very powerful post-World War II movement that empowered citizens to become more critically minded in a way that is very British and very moderate. And there's another example, the Durham Miners Association in the 19th and 20th centuries that brought together miners in Northeast England. That was a very democratic, self-governing approach. I think more innovation in those areas will make people will make people less prone to the emotional manipulation that comes through AI. So to me, it's about economic growth, as obvious or as bland as that might be. And the second piece is about local forms of association that help people to become more educated. But that's outside of formal types of education, like higher education, schools, etc.
Interesting to see how society's development may in fact be the prophylactic or the preventative measure. Alain, anything further you want to add here?
Yes. First of all, I want to say this time I'm going to be positive and optimist. I feel much more at ease with the electoral legislative framework in Canada than I would be if I was living in the US. So our system, our electoral system in Canada, by and large, it's the legislative framework we have and the machinery, the electoral machinery, is perfectible. Yes, of course, it is subject, but it is fulfilling currently it's fulfilling its mandate, because after all, the elections are the heartbeat of democracy. And we have the machinery that we have in place. Does it meet that standard, facilitating the choice, individual choice by citizen? By and large, it does. It can certainly be strengthened, because if you look, the legislative framework we have in Canada at present, as it relates to political debate and election, have established a set of principles and regulations that clearly, the guardrails that Peter alluded to, that establish accountability with the traditional diffusers of information, whether it be the written press or television or radio. So we are, in a way, well covered on that. It's not clear that we are as well covered as it relates to social media and the new technologies of information. And that's where, frankly, the vulnerability is the threat to democracy. It's the most important. And there ways, let me offer you a few thoughts about ways how to enforce, how to provide greater strength to our electoral system. First of all, strengthen transparency, oversight, human accountability, civil literacy, you made reference to that, and news provenance, and I want to emphasize the key point about accountability. Now, we have seen, and there have been inquiries on that. Most recently, there have been, of course, I want to mention cybersecurity of our election system. It needs to be strengthened. It is not as strong as it could be. And also we need to strengthen our guard against foreign interference. And foreign interference come from a number of places. It's not limited to one. And there is interference and interference. And now it's becoming even more aggressive. So these are my comments on the. But again, the framework, the basic framework for our election system in Canada, whether it be at the federal, provincial, or municipal level, is by and large quite satisfactory. Can it be improved? Yes, but we have a very strong basis to protect our democracy.
Okay, Peter, any concluding comments you want to make?
Well, actually, Alain summarized a number of the points that I made in my opening remarks in regard to the importance of accountability and those sorts of human characteristics. So I would just be repeating myself here, but I would echo what I just heard.
Okay, so next question, Emerson. Technology moves very fast, faster than legislation, faster than regulations can evolve at a national or at an international level. We were talking about earlier, I think before you arrived, that Albania has recently created a minister of AI as an AI. So it has an AI minister that is actually an AI device at cabinet in order to avoid corruption or for a variety of reasons. So when you're looking at public policy and regulation, we're actually seeing, at least in one government, the introduction of AI right at the cabinet level in order to contain and control some of the excesses that we associate with human beings. So how should democracies design regulatory frameworks for AI? How do we do that balance agility and accountability and avoid the corporate capture and the heavy-handed state control? Is there a perspective you could share with us on this one, Emerson?
It's a good question. As I said earlier, I'm not an expert on regulation. One of my best friends on the UK side, who I've known for 10 years, was named the Minister of AI there about a week ago, which is nice. And he's definitely more effective than an AI bot. He's one of the great shining lights for the UK right now, and just with them not doing so well. I mean, my thought again on the regulation piece, how do you keep pace with the speed of technologies? I'm just not sure that you can as a government. And this came back to the piece on trustworthiness. Whenever I hear the word trustworthiness on the AI side, how do you regulate for that? I think AI is a black box, or it's largely a black box. So how do you actually regulate and keep up? I think this goes back to the earlier piece from the youth series, is there's so much opportunity to use AI for economic transformation. For example, how do you use AI to identify better ore deposits for mines? There are so many uses. The focus should be, how do we use AI to spur economic growth across these areas at speed, rather than trying to slow it down? So that's increasingly my bias, is not how do we keep up with it, because I don't think that we can, and certainly I don't think government can. Even though there's great people in government, there just isn't the speed to keep up with the private sector. How do we embrace it and use it for deep economic growth? That to me should be more the mindset.
When I listen to your perspective, I think of the invention of fire, which we don't really regulate directly, but we teach kids how to be careful in the usage of fire. And maybe that's where we're going to go, is along the lines that you've been referring to, Emerson, is how individuals need to know what AI can do and cannot do, and how to protect themselves. In any case, Eli, anything you want to share here?
Yes, actually, I do. I first of all, a couple of elements to consider. The problem, legislation can never, ever, into the future, or even if you look back 50 years when technology is evolving, can never catch up. Always we lag in terms of the technology. Legislation will always lag. But we know that in the public sector, technology companies and others have to deal with turbulent world. And how do they know what to do for the next 5 years? What do? They basically create a variety of critical assumptions of where they're going to go, and basically create scenario planning, and then analyze these assumptions, and based on input from different advisory board experts in the field, they kind of create a couple of most likely scenario and the worst likely scenario, and basically select the one that they want to go with. What about government doing similar thing, where if you look right now, we are dealing with the fallout of generative AI. But we know, if you listen to all the pundits, that within the next 2 to 5 years, there'll be another major milestone that will change everything and will have towards general AI, basically artificial general intelligence, and then all bets are off. So you're going to go on this merry-go-round where you have to change it all the time. So the idea is to utilize advisory board and create laws that in essence are anticipating and creating these kind of scenarios of where the technology will evolve to, and what we can expect, and then create limits for the legislation of what you should do or not do within these limits. So the judges, the judiciary system is able to really adjudicate when it comes to what to do with it. So you can do a narrow range as opposed to black and white in the legislation. You need to do a range based on the scenario planning that the expert have identified what's the most likelihood in terms of the technology curve over the next 3 years. So I think this is one way that can help. And then, of course, you have an oversight advisory committee that can oversight and provide input to the government to say, well, we are tracking it properly, or no, look, there is a major development is taking place and we need to adjust it. So this is just a suggestion I think could be adopted from the corporate world into the federal and provincial worlds.
Okay, thank you. Elaine?
On that point, I might be closer to Peter than I am to Esmond about regulation. Of course, AI should not be overregulated. Obviously, I mean, we are all, and I agree with you, legislation is often lagging, regularly lagging technology innovation. You are right. So it needs to be done in a prudent and balanced way. But for the public good, if you look at this kind of a trend, and one of the public good, I presume for all of us, is democracy, you know. AI companies, GAFAs themselves, are asking for regulations, but regulations that are not impeding the development of AI, but provide key principles, key guardrails to stay within. And we have a piece of legislation which died on the order paper in Ottawa. It died because of the election, the last election. Bill C-27, I believe that's the number. And Bill C-27 would have provided the legislative framework and a charter, a digital charter for AI responsible adoption in Canada, not to reduce or to impede innovation, not at all, but to provide those guardrails that are essential for our common good. So yes, this will always be a balancing act between regulatory. If you look, I want to compare, sometimes it's not only me drawing this comparison. The force of AI is comparable to nuclear energy. When the atomic bomb was developed and tested, there was an immediate recognition by decision makers that it needed to be regulated because of the massive impact nuclear energy can have for the good, by the way, or for the worst. So that's the kind of balancing act we are in insofar as AI is an AI future development. As you said, future is not far. We are talking to 3 to 4 years when hell breaks loose, when we have when we reach singularity. So the issue is, and this is an issue not for us Canadians, this is an issue for us human beings. How do we want to keep the relationship balance between us, the human species, and what is going to take place in the next 4 to 5 years? At the maximum. So do we need a legislative framework? Do we need those guardrails? They are essential for our survival.
Peter?
Well, again, I echo what I've been hearing from my colleagues on the panel, so I don't have anything to argue with against them. Like Alain just said, I think he and I are both closer to some need for regulation than we heard from Emerson, but that's a matter of degree, and we haven't discussed that.
Okay, well, Peter, to the extent that government gets involved in economic development, some politicians said the economy takes care of itself, but I think most of us would argue that depending upon the situation, government have a role to play in economic development. And AI in this discussion is what we're looking at. So AI promises growth, but it also risks job loss, deepened inequality.
Yes.
Government
Yes.
can play a role in helping to mitigate or temper. In the age of surveillance capitalism, I read about
Yes.
Shoshana Zuboff before ChatGPT talking about corporations and the chasing of the dollar will determine the evolution of technology and AI, which means corporations may be the regulator of the future. How can governments integrate AI into economic policy in ways that promote fairness, quality of life, opportunity without succumbing to the temptation of efficiency at the expense of people and resulting in this bifurcation of society of the haves and the have-nots. So, Peter, I want to start out with you on this one.
Well, one of the things that, in answer to your question, one of the things I believe a role for government, especially in democracies, I mean, I would produce this as a global, but we know that some governments aren't democracies. So it certainly within democracies is the role of government is helping in the transition of retraining and in replacement, upskilling of people who are already in the workforce who are going to be displaced by adding AI. So it's actually going to displace their job, as well as those who are going to be complemented by AI and will have added assistance through an AI tool, which may mean they don't need as many humans to do the work as they would have had in the days of the past. So I think that the government has a role to play, but I also feel that the corporations, particularly public corporations with large stockholding, spread about many holders, that they too have a social responsibility here. And I think that AI may actually be a driver to create better, and I say better in a positive sense here, concept of the role of large corporations that have traditionally focused on making money to also now have a very large component of their focus dealing with social responsibility with respect to what they're producing and servicing in the marketplace. Go
Alain.
ahead.
Yeah. Yes, I think I'm following up. I don't have any problem with what was said earlier. Looking at corporations and so on, the danger there, and that's where government has to play a role. We have to ensure that there is competition, that and not because currently, if we look at the authoritarian regime model, of China, and if you look at the US model, yes, there are less regulations in the US, but nevertheless, the problem with the US is that you have a number of dominant mega companies that are stifling competition, and where even antitrust legislation in the US has not succeeded. So that's the danger, of not over-regulation, but that's also the danger of lack of regulation. So you see the market forces are not playing, are stifled by those mega companies. And that's a risk. The spillover for Canadian companies, Canadian startups and other, that's a risk for their expansion, for their development in international markets.
Okay, thank you. Eli.
Barry, I see the role of government into four vectors. Few of the vectors are simplistic and can be easily addressed. One may be more difficult. So what are the four vectors? Vector number one is financial. Clearly, there will be displacement, and we may end up with universal guaranteed income. So financially, definitely governments can play a role in that. So that's easy to solve. The second one is professional training. This is really to add to what Peter said. And from that perspective, that could be accomplished. Not easily. You cannot necessarily take a truck driver that makes $150,000 and make him an AI designer. That's not necessarily going to happen, but training and upskilling and reskilling is possible, and government and corporation can definitely take a role in that. The third one is the availability of e-services, where you have a broad population that don't have similar access to everybody. So in other words, internet access, cell phone access, the tool itself. So the senior citizen may or may not, there'll be a different level of know-how. So when you offer e-services, some may not be able to consume them as others. So government can absolutely play a role in that to ensure that the e-services that are available are available to everybody. The last one that concerns me the most is what I call the knowledge, the know-how. I believe that the wage gap that we all are concerned about by itself is an elephant in the room, but can it be solved or not? I don't know, but with universal guaranteed income, you can at least address some of it. But the know-how gap is much more concerning. Why? And Peter and I had an article on that. The most vulnerable people in the community are the ones that are going to rely on AI bots and AI companion, and and also to access the information, which means there is a danger that rather than following a critical thinking and trying to solve problems, they're going to rely on getting answers from the AI, which may make them less knowledgeable and less attuned with what's happening in the community and the world. And that's very dangerous because you'll have a knowledge gap. And when you have a knowledge gap, this is really very dangerous because you'll have the fully educated when the one that are know how to utilize the tools of the AI and the one that are not as educated and are going to rely totally on AI. So the knowledge gap, I worry, will be much worse than the financial gap, the salary gap, the wage gap. So, but these are the four elements the government can really address.
Very interesting. As you were speaking, I got to thinking about the reliance that we've had on public education systems as if they were an AI in the past, where we got through a system, the education, the imparting of knowledge that came from an education system, singular, and whether or not we were denying people knowledge that they may have acquired otherwise empirically. I won't take that to any great depth, but AI is simply another form of education. And in fact, it may be more unbiased than some of our educational systems as they are practiced today, but that's a whole nother agenda. Emerson, closing point.
I have a few small pieces to add. I mean, on the competition side, Elaine, you mentioned the U.S. the monopolies. Canada's, I mean, pretty bad as well with Shaw and Bell and these large, families that kind of run everything. So I think there's an overall mindset piece here on how do we become more competitive? How do we break up these big organizations and have governments that really work hard to do that? In terms of there being winners and losers, which I think is part of this question, I think it's important to embrace, because of technology, there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. But I find that people tend not to want to acknowledge that there's going to be losers. And I've been in tons of conferences over the last 10 years saying, how do we ensure that there are no losers from trade or from technology? And I just don't think that that's possible. And on the front, on the guaranteed income piece, I would be maybe more libertarian and say governments just don't have the money for this. We can't spend more. So there's a reality to the world that we are in, but also entering, which is frankly, and this is why I'm skeptical on the possibility of regulation, is the world's becoming more dog eat dog because of US, China, and we're going to be on the American side, and that's going to keep being the case. So we as Canadians need to become more dog eat dog in our mentality while maintaining a minimum level of support for people who have lost their jobs. But we shouldn't be trying to protect everybody. I'm increasingly of the mind that it's just not possible. We just do not have the money. So I would then build on what Eli said on the piece on training programs. Is how do corporations maintain a sense of social responsibility, working to an extent with governments, but more so with universities and community colleges, and develop programs for young people that teach these skills with more assertiveness than is currently the case. What's our version of the Israeli approach of going into the IDF, where the people that come out of this are just off the charts in terms of their technological ability and their creation of new companies? What's the Canadian version of that? And what I'm saying is not a very Canadian thing to say, because it's not about protecting people. It's not what the government said recently. It was all about protect people. But it's more so recognizing the world we are in is a lot different than the world from 5 years ago. It's going to become increasingly ruthless. and we need to adapt more in that vein. That's my sense.
This, by the way, gentlemen, was the view that came through our youth series. Youth recognizing that government has a tendency to overprotect, which leaves the youth of our society less resilient. I've got a speech to give on Sunday, which will be about encouraging aspiration instead of desperation and fear, which is what we've been promoting so much with AI coming, climate change, DEI, you name it. And I think, Csorba, you just echoed the sentiment that came from youth itself, which was comforting. So thank you. Okay, wrap up question. I'm going to start out with you, Peter, which may be unfair but then again, I started with you in the beginning. This is sort of an open-ended point as we look ahead. AI is both a test and a temptation, shaping governance, elections, economic development. If you had to name one guiding principle or concrete action that democracies, and let's say Canada, should adopt now to ensure AI strengthens liberty, accountability, prosperity over the next decade, what recommendation would you give to Mr. Carney?
I would say the following. I like not to reinvent the wheel. And my best favorite one is the principle the OECD in 2019 adopted. And basically the principle that they've adopted is really based on promoting innovation, trustworthiness in AI, while respecting human rights and democratic values. And if you read it, this principle must be based on transparency, all the words that we like: transparency, participation, inclusion, and accountability, right? And they guide the policymaker to maximize the benefit and minimize the risk to the development and application of AI to economic growth while adhering to social value. So why to reinvent the wheel? You have one that is right there.
Okay, Alain.
Based upon our discussion, I think that, and I'm looking at it from a Canadian perspective, I fully agree on the need to reskill the population. I mean, Canadians. I mean, clearly, AI. We have strong capacities in Canada in terms of research and development, AI development. Companies are much running and so on, but the rate of AI adoption in the public sector and in the private sector, small and medium-sized businesses, is not as strong as it is amongst our competitors, our partners. So there is a need, an urgency in as we move into the digital economy, as we face this tsunami, to reskill people. I mentioned the public sector. You're familiar with the public sector? Well, the public sector can be also an engine of growth. We have, if you look at the public sector overall in Canada, that's close to 40% of GDP. So it's not unusual. There we should we should think big in condensing or reducing the public sector and reinforcing efficiency and productivity in the public sector, so a citizen-centric public sector and an interoperability framework, because we, the taxpayers, we, the citizens, we, the users of services in Canada, we expect, to have effective, efficient services, whether it is federal, provincial, or municipal. And at present, you see that AI adoption and the AI adoption is done in a very fragmented way. There is no national approach to AI adoption in that important sector of the Canadian economy, the public sector, strengthening, reducing cost saving, and improving efficiency. That's the rule of the game. So my strong advice would be, to reinforce data interoperability and AI adoption within the public sector throughout Canada. That should be a national project, infrastructure project, because AI Data interoperability is part of our national infrastructure as the railway and the power grid is. So that's my thought.
Thank you. Emerson?
One question here that's on my mind is, how do you keep up on the government side and on the political side with the speed of technology, and having an AI minister and team around that person who actually have a background in that space, I think would provide confidence on that front. It's partly the example of Eli in terms of having the right advisory board, but also having somebody in that political role who actually understands AI and is smart enough to keep up with the corporate side would be very useful. And on that front, this friend of mine, Kinishka, who became the UK AI minister a week ago, he has a background partly in this space. He was a tech investor, Stanford MBA, very, very smart guy, Indian immigrant family. He has that background. Having somebody on the Canadian side that runs, or a group of people that have AI backgrounds, whether it's Shopify, people like Eli running, etc., that actually know this space would be a big step forward, because then there'd be no learning curve. It'd be different than having a journalist, as is currently the case, in that role. So that would be my genuine recommendation, is get the right people running and then put them in that ministerial role.
Interesting. Peter, you're nodding your head. You've got the wrap-up moment.
Yes, thank you, Perry. I also remember what I wanted to introduce before. The request that you had as to what I would tell the Prime Minister. I would suggest that Canada, of course, as we've all said here in this conversation, is well known in its strength in AI research. But we also are well known as not being very successful at scaling our companies. So on the basis that we're not trying to scale every company, I would suggest that with respect to AI, that our emphasis be put on AI safety. AI safety is beneficial to our citizens, to all members of the community, and to the world as a whole. So we have some countries that are rather loose on the idea of safety at the moment, and we have others that are well, we don't actually know what they're doing in the dark rooms. But the point is, I think AI safety is an area that Canada could become a world leader in, sort of like we did with peacekeeping with the United Nations. The other thing I wanted to add as well, which was reinforcing on what Alain was saying as well, was the idea that data is absolutely critical. And one of the big issues that has now resurfacing as a result of the big concentration of data in some of these companies that now hold our data sets, foreign companies, in fact, is the need for rekindling the notion of transborder data flow. This was an issue in the 1990s in the OECD for several years, but it sort of faded when the AI, well, not the AI companies, but the Googles and Amazons started to appear, and Meta and so on. And so we started building large data sets of people's personal information in servers that were outside of Canada.
Well,
or even if they were in Canada, could be accessed by the parent company.
okay, so before opening up for audience questions, we got a few minutes, and I will leave us maybe another 15 minutes for Q&A. But I'm going to say thank you to the panel. What we just heard are not just closing words, but guiding lights, principles that can help us steer AI toward strengthening democracy rather than eroding it. If there was one lesson to carry forward, it's that the technology will not decide for us, or maybe should not. We must decide, through courage, restraint, and accountability, how AI will serve our societies. The message to Carney would be along very much those lines. The test of democracy here in Canada and elsewhere around the world is not the power of AI, but the power of our citizens and governments to remain stronger still in the face of this emerging technology. So Jeff, you've got your hand up. You go first. What question might you have or comment you'd like to make?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how international corporations will operate data centers that follow the rules laid out by various jurisdictions. So for instance, if a company can avoid restrictive rules by locating in the Wild West of the United States, how will that affect the development of artificial intelligence in jurisdictions that are attempting to constrain AI? So Alberta is actively courting the construction of data centers, and it's an attractive location. because of our abundant natural gas-based energy, and it's also has access to a robust, secure network. Cold climate also helps reduce cooling costs. Will national AI rules make Alberta lose its advantage by making Canada as a whole less palatable to AI investors? Canadian rules for social media platforms like Facebook regarding the restrictions on sharing news sources suggest that there may be a technological workaround based on the location of the end user. But what if the rules apply to the physical location where the compute is actually located?
By the way, Jeff, a good closing observation on the emergence of data centers and the whole infrastructure that is going to be needed in order to support this AI tsunami, as it's been put. What I don't know of when we talk about reskilling, what do we reskill people for? The knowledge economy has been so dominant in our society, and so much of our society, from schools to universities to communications, has been built on the acquisition and the pursuit of knowledge. With AI emerging as a vehicle to do so well with so much information, how does the human being find what work will look like in the future? What will our economy be? And I don't know whether or not any one of us wishes to jump into that, but this is even a more complex question, I think, than the emergence of singularity, is when knowledge is a commodity. What does government do? So much of our regulatory regime and of our education, of our aspirations and of our pursuit has been about knowledge. And now we have AI emerging saying, I can do better than you. I'm not saying that this is an existential crisis for human beings. I'm saying it's an opportunity, but I'm not quite sure for what. What would we do when we're not aspiring to know? Is it to create? Is it to belong? Is it to network? Is it to get a rocking chair and be entertained? Eli, anything you want to add here? Is this a provocative, naive question, or is this real?
No, it is. I will add one thing that we don't know. I mean, I keep on saying at this point in time, we are dealing only with small segment, which is the generative AI, the ramification associated with generative AI. But if you listen to all the smart people, Eric Schmidt and other people that are in the know-how, because they're developing AI companies, Sam Altman and the others, they are predicting that something significant, there will be another milestone, another exponential change in terms of growth of what will happen and new innovation. And then we have to deal with that. So at this point in time, all we are doing in terms of economic situation, we are dealing with one thing, which is the fallout of the economic growth and disparity associated with generative AI. We are decimating the wide. Who knew a year ago that programmers, if you told people a year and a half ago that programmers are not a good profession to go into, would you believe that a year and a half ago? No one would have believed you. So to try to gauge what will happen in 2 years, when Eric Schmidt is saying in 5 years, watch out, or less than 5 years, Sam Altman is saying, watch out, what will happen? They are producing ChatGPT-5 is, I think, 4 times more, I don't know order of magnitude, but significantly more powerful than GPT-4. So the new development are very fast and furious, and we cannot really determine what will be the impact. So
Well,
we just need to be careful.
Mustafa Suleiman's book on the coming wave sees no option but containment.
Yeah.
His book is very thoroughly well written, and Eric Schmidt, the same thing. But the genie's out of the bottle. I don't know, and they echo the same thing. We don't know. I liked Emerson of saying we as individuals may need to withdraw and make damn sure that we're protecting ourselves and our families and those we care about as a bottom-up strategy, because we can't contain this top-down. Peter, is your hand up for
Yes.
adding something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a few comments. One is in regard to the scaling that's going on in respect to data centers. It's rather interesting because there's more and more, let's call it jurisdictions trying to attract data centers, and more what
Yeah.
appears to be money that's willing to be invested in data centers. Yet on the technical side, the scaling of AI large language models is actually slowing down.
Mhm.
So the larger data centers, coupled with the slowing down of the language model scaling, may lead, I think, to what ultimately might be a bubble. And this is not unlike perhaps the e-commerce bubble we saw in the early 1990s. At that time, we had, of course, a couple of things going on. We had the emergence of e-commerce, but we also had the convergence of telephony and the internet. So two completely different types of networking and therefore different protocols, so they couldn't talk to each other. And so we overcame that by basically giving up the old telephony networking approach, and everything's now gone to the optical fiber, or not everything, but much has gone to optical fiber and wireless. So
Yeah,
that
I
was
mean, there is
one
a
of
fair amount being written right now, or not, whether we're witnessing a bubble, and whether the bubble is as broad as AI or the bubble is the data centers themselves. The amount of money that's flowing is disrupting money flowing to new innovations, as everything seems to be lining up on AI. And there's a concern that it may be constraining innovation on other fronts as well. So
that's my point. I think it is.
that topic is worth keeping our eyes on for sure, whether or not there are indications. Now, a credit to Eric Schmidt, and we talked about this last week. He's identified things that we should be watching for, because we haven't talked at all really today, not so much about containment, but AI getting out of control. And the things that Eric Schmidt has identified that we should be keeping our eyes on, where it takes on agency itself, where it starts using a language that we're not familiar with. There are a number of things that we should be monitoring, and that government should be keeping its eye out for with that new AI minister that we're recommending.
The thing I wanted to mention, because you were talking about coders, there's a little bit of a dark secret in this coding thing. I mean, computer-aided software engineering, which was a big deal back in the let's call it late 80s, early 90s, and that you could use specification in the English language, for example, to create computer code. That was to some degree only successful with those who had complete control on a language. And I happened to actually be responsible for that at Cognos. I was director of computer-aided software engineering. So nowadays, we just heard about what was just said about, AI models creating a lot of code. Well, it's turning out that these companies, the big companies that we've mentioned, many by name, have let thousands of their lower coder people go. Well, what's happening is they've now turned to the AI system to create the lower level code that the earlier adopters, earlier coders would have produced. And the net result is that the higher level coders, the top level of coders, are now having to spend about 50% of their time correcting code that was generated by AI. So the
Okay.
efficiency and productivity is dropping dramatically. And they've let a lot of thousands of employees go.
We
So
will.
there's an interregnum going on right here, and I'm not sure what it's going to lead to, but I mean it's a classic we don't know, and it's going to be subject to a variety of scenarios, and any one of the scenarios may not be the right one.
Well, I intend on digging deeper into the emergence and the evolution and the flow of technology itself, not so much the applications which we've been talking about in this series, but getting into the engine, the machinery itself, starting October 2nd. Elaine, you want to make a comment here?
I'm very mindful of the fact that close to 90% of data from Canadian private sector is stored in the US. And that raises some very serious, frankly, security issues, because the legislative protections in the US against foreign data don't exist, basically, or they are very limited. So there is a distinct Canadian advantage. Well, in fact, the advantage is threefold: availability of energy, availability of water, and cold temperature most of the year. So those factors being put together, yes, there is a room for considering not only data centers, but also gigafactories, which are much more, which have greater job impact in terms of development than the data centers. And gigafactories located in the different regions of Canada could make could make of Canada the new Swiss banking system, but not banking for money, banking for data. I'm just flagging that. The other point about losing control, I was shocked to hear from the Nobel Prize and with the chairman of DeepMind in the US, who indicated at this point in time, they are realizing that the new algorithm that they are creating, they have already lost control on how large language models are being developed by the computer themselves without any human intervention. So they don't understand what's going on even at present. So talking about losing control, we are there already. We are losing control.
Yeah, and I think it'll happen. It's like the frog in the boiling. It's going to happen, and we're not probably going to notice it. And all of a sudden, we're there. Bill, got your hand up?
You bet. Excellent meetup. Just taking the notes here. As Peter said, the ability of AI to code is very impressive. The trouble is it's very ineffective. Its algorithms are very bad. And you're absolutely right, Peter. It's higher end programmers have to fix the errors that AI is doing. I don't know if that's repairable. I think it's just, again, AI pulls from a broad data set, and most programmers are bad, so AI is a bad programmer. And you're right, companies are starting to regret firing their low-level coding people to fix these basic errors that AI codes in. Alain, you're correct. It's the location of the data centers that's becoming primary within the jurisdictions of your operation versus the legal framework of that operation. And hence we see a lot of what's called sovereign data centers being created. The bubble regarding data centers. Yes, there's billions of dollars designed for data centers, but data centers are not a bubble right now. Our problem is power. Yes, for example, Alberta, we can create a lot of power, but the challenge is we can't deliver it to the data centers because of a number of problems, such as a shortage of transformers. If you order a transformer today, you're looking at a 5 to 8 year wait time, which is why the providers and distributors of our electrical grid are so reluctant to add in data centers. For example, I was talking with EPCOR last week. Our little data center is located, and they have 7 megawatts sitting in a particular location, and they're very reluctant to release it because there are no transformers to increase the capability of that location. And so they're husbanding all the power they can just in case of an emergency that they need to deploy it. And good luck getting your data center up on the grid. So a lot of the designs are to have independent power, but after a certain size, which is approximately 10 megawatts, you are required to connect to the grid. So you have to get a transformer, and you're waiting 5 to 8 years. This is just not a Canadian problem, it's a global problem. So we see a pileup of investments for data centers. Very few are being built simply because they can't access power. Temperature in Alberta, yeah, that helps your OPEX a little bit, but it's actually not a big deal. We have to build data centers for our summertime. So the same CapEx needed for a data center in Arizona is the same CapEx we needed in Edmonton for those few days of really hot days. So yes, we get a little bit of break of the OPEX in winter, but the real benefit of Alberta is our tax regime. We've got low corporate taxes, and that helps a heck of a lot. We do have a government that is supporting innovation and technology and the data center side. And eventually, yes, we're energy rich, and that'll help. But yeah, data centers is a bubble. Yeah, the press are showing the bubble, buildup of investment can't be deployed right now. So anyway, there's my quick brief.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's sobering. Thank you. Barry, did you have your hand up with a comment or
Yeah.
observation?
It's just an observation on all the dialogue we've had with the knowledge that half the world is being left out of that dialogue, and which is considered really the Southern Hemisphere, and they are not doing nothing. Now, I don't have information on what they are doing, but I know there is a feeling amongst a lot of thoughtful groups like this that are focused on the Southern Hemisphere, maybe outside of what the Chinese are doing in the Southern Hemisphere. I don't know anything else that's happening there that except that this technology is being looked at as the jump they require to start to close the wealth gap between the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. And I think we need to look at it because it may be an opportunity for our industries here, but it also may be that they don't have the encumbrance of history that we have in economic development and social development and all those kinds of good things. So it's a question I have rather than any more insight. And the question is, what is going on in the Southern Hemisphere? Because they are starting to come together as a group.
Anyone want to add anything there? I mean, Alain, you've had some experience on the diplomatic front. Any background, or Peter, on what's happening elsewhere in the world?
Well, we certainly have a new, let's call it organizational block of nations that started with a small group. It's the BRICS. It's now up over a dozen. I'm not sure what the latest number is, but this is basically the global South that is makes up the BRICS. So we're certainly seeing a fragmentation in early state of fragmentation because this is being run out of China, the BRICS initiative, Shanghai Cooperation Unit organization, I should say. So I would suggest that it's the jury's out, if we can say there's a jury as to what's going to happen, but it could be a collision or it could be a amalgamation. I have no idea, and it even could be a danger to the institutions of some of the institutions of the Bretton Woods and or the UN. I mean, these are all in a state of varying degrees of flux right now.
Well, maybe that's the wrap-up conclusion here, is we remain to be in a world of flux.
Right.
It continues to evolve as rapidly as it is. We're not quite sure how we will go about regulating it. This is a discussion about we have no idea.
But we have some idea, but
I know.
we don't know which is the right idea.
In fact, maybe maybe it's
right.
not that we have many ideas.
Yeah.
We're not quite sure. Well, what will be the governing determinant? We're not yet sure if this is going to be a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's threat or opportunity or both. We don't know whether or not a bottom-up strategy of preparing people for the new source of fire or preparing governments through some new united technology organization. We don't yet know, but we know we need to watch this.